Welcome once again to Jesus or Muhammad, two largest religions in history. Christianity and Islam teach some of the same things, but when we get to the core of certain issues, we find very different teachings. And on this program, if you're watching for the first time, we explore those issues and we try to get to the bottom of things. Usually on this program, we focus on the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of the Bible. We focus on the life of Muhammad, the life of Jesus. So we focus a lot on theology and early Christian and early Muslim history, comparing the two. But we also need to ground our work in real life. And we get to the modern world and we see how the differences in these two systems can play out here in the modern world. And tonight we're going to explore a very important issue, persecution of the worldwide church. And we're going to take a look at some of the things that are going on around the world, and we're going to see how these things are related to Islam. Not everything Muslims do is grounded in Islam, but sometimes what Muslims do comes directly from the Muslim sources or was behavior that was exhibited by Islam's prophet Muhammad. With me in the studio, we have some friends that you probably already know. We have Paul Rezkalla, whose family is Coptic in origin. His family came here from Egypt, and later in the program we'll get into some of the things going on in the history of Egypt, but the Copts in Egypt certainly know what we're talking about when we address persecution. We also have our good friend C.L. Edwards, who was a devout Muslim. He was a Salafi for 10 years, and C.L. and I are going to focus, when it applies, we're going to focus on how persecution in the world ties into the teachings of Islam. So if we see something happening in the world and it ties into something taught by Muhammad or taught in the Quran, we're going to point that out so that people are aware that not everything that the media tells us has nothing to do with Islam has nothing to do with Islam, right? Sometimes things do have something to do with Islam. We also have a very special guest with us via Skype. We have Bishop Julian Dobbs of the Barnabas Fund. And Bishop Dobbs is an expert in worldwide persecution of the church. He's with us by Skype. Sometimes we have difficulties patching Skype through, so if there are any glitches along the way, we'll just pause and wait for the connection to catch up. But Bishop Dobbs, can you hear us?
I can hear you loud and clear.
Great. We were wondering, before we get started in talking about persecution in the church, we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your organization.
I'll be pleased to do that. One of the roles that I fulfill in Christian ministry is the Director for Global Relations for an organization called the Barnabas Fund. Barnabas Fund is an internationally based Christian ministry in the United Kingdom. We have offices in the United States, in Australia, in New Zealand, where I'm originally from, and various other field offices around the world. And our work is to, predominantly, to support Christians who are suffering in the Muslim world, whether they be converts or national Christians. As many of you will be aware, the church is suffering significantly around the world. The majority of Christians are in the minority, and that places significant pressure upon them simply because they confess their declared faith in Jesus Christ. Secondly, we're an organization that works to provide advocacy and education, both in countries like the United States, to help Christians be aware of what is happening to their brothers and sisters around the world, and also to advocate on their behalf, to be a voice for the voiceless in places like Washington, D.C., where I am based, to help bring the situation of persecuted believers to our administration, to the Congress, so that we're able to engage a little bit more clearly on their behalf and hopefully effectively. We have project work around the world in various countries, ranging from building Bible schools to providing food and emergency relief for converts. You can find information about the Barnabas Fund at barnabasaid.org.
Hi, we lost.
Are we back together?
Hi, we lost the connection there for a second.
I can hear you now. Are we back together?
Hi, yeah, go ahead, continue. We lost the connection for a second.
So many people will realize that it's sobering to think that there are places just an aircraft flight away from where we may be in North America, where to do what Christians do on a Sunday morning in this country and get together for public worship and the proclamation of God. So less than a day's flight from most major cities in the United States. For our brothers and sisters around the world, that activity is a life-threatening activity. And so our work is to speak up on behalf of suffering Christians around the world and help the church in the West to be educated about some of the challenges that are posed by religion Islam.
Bishop Dobbs, thank you, and really the Barnabas Fund, certainly one of the greatest, most important organizations in the world today as far as actually going out and defending Christians in some of the just horrible areas. I mean, lots of times we don't know how good we have it in the United States. Where would you like to begin with discussing the persecuted church?
Well, let's begin by talking about some of the challenges, and our brother who's in the studio with you might like to make some comment. But let's begin by talking about some of the challenges that exist for Christians when they are in the minority. When Islam is in the majority in a country, certainly Christians and Jews and others tend to suffer more directly or are challenged more directly than when Islam is the minority religion in a country. And that poses some incredible challenges for many of our brothers and sisters around the world.
Oh, actually, that's something we'd like to, I'm sure CL and I would like to jump in on right there. CL.
Yeah.
Sir.
CL, Bishop Dobbs just pointed out something that I mean, if people could learn anything about the teachings of Islam, this would be essential, namely that the treatment of Christians and Jews among Muslims depends kind of on how many Muslims there are in a certain area. Is that about right?
Well, if you look at the example of the early Muslims, Muhammad and his companions, that would certainly be true. Mm-hmm. You look at their time when they were in Mecca, before the immigration to Medina, when they were a small minority. Most of the Muslims were powerless. Many of them were slaves. Some of them were influential, but not all of them. They didn't rise up. They didn't, start a revolution. They just quietly followed the teachings in the way of Muhammad. Muhammad tried to not make a whole lot of trouble. He tried to, he would speak what he had to say, but he wasn't trying to start any type of warfare or any upheaval. So it was pretty calm at that time. It wasn't until they migrated and went to Medina that warfare and jihad came into play.
Now, warfare and jihad came into play when they were in Medina, but it was defensive war, right? People were attacking them, no question. People were persecuting Muslims during this early Medinan period. So when Muslims say that, yes, Islam allows fighting, is that always in self-defense, or did something else happen?
Well, no, it's not always in self-defense. You could argue the first raid that Muhammad had ordered on the Meccans when they were traveling, I mean, was that really self-defense? So yes, the Meccans were persecuting them before they immigrated, but when they were, sending their goods off to Syria and the Muslims came and attacked them, it wasn't like they were marching going to Medina. They were conducting business. They were trying to go to Syria. Then here comes the Muslims coming to raid them. Later on, we see Revelation start to change and tweak. Because Muhammad says, oh, fight those who fight you. But when you look at the end, the tail end of Muhammad's life, the revelations start coming down like, kill them, strike their nets, strike off the tips of their fingers. That doesn't sound too defensive to me.
And I just so you don't think that we're making this up, I'm going to quote you directly the 3 stages from the Muslim sources. There are all kinds of passages we could go to, but just to give you the idea, this is the overall pattern. And you can see this pattern whether you're talking about the United States, whether you're talking about Europe, whether you're talking about Africa, whether you're talking about the Middle East or Pakistan or Afghanistan. You see the same pattern. And there's a reason you see this same pattern. The pattern goes back to Muhammad himself, to the teachings of the Quran, to the teachings of the Hadith. So, stage one in Islam. When Muslims are outnumbered, they are to proclaim a message of peace and tolerance. When Muslims form a small part of the population, they can't win a war, they can't fight. If they did fight, they'd be crushed. And so, what do? They fight not a bit. They don't fight. So, is this part of Islam, or is this just Muslims, happen to be influenced by Western values? Well, actually, listen to what we say in the Quran. This is one of the earliest surahs in the Quran, chapter 109. Just keep in mind when I say surah 109, we quote surah 9 or something like that. The Quran is not chronological. It's not arranged chronologically. The numbers are all jumbled up, and actually the later passages in the Quran, surah 109, those are generally earlier revelations in the history of Islam. Surah 109, tell me how peaceful this sounds. Say, this is commanding Muslims what they're to say to unbelievers who disagree with them. Say, O ye unbelievers, I do not serve that which you serve, nor do you serve him whom I serve, nor am I going to serve that which you serve, nor are you going to serve him whom I serve. You shall have your religion, and I shall have my religion. We disagree. We have a disagreement. Oh, that's fine. You believe what you believe. I'll believe what I believe. You believe in your gods. I'll believe in my gods. No problem. Let's just get along. That's Surah 109. And Muslims in the West will point to that and say, you're saying that Islam has violent teaching. No, it doesn't. This is what Islam teaches. Very, very, very peaceful. And that is a very peaceful passage. The problem is that's not Muhammad's final marching orders for Muslims in other situations. That was the situation when Muhammad was totally outnumbered, when he had around 100 followers in the city of Mecca, a city of thousands, couldn't have possibly hoped to win a battle or war. Peace and tolerance, that is what Islam is all about. Now, what would correspond to early Mecca, where Muslims form a small portion of the population, someplace like the United States? What did Muhammad preach when he was totally outnumbered? Peace and tolerance. What do Muslims preach in the United States? Peace and tolerance. Now, I'm not saying that when a Muslim tells you that Islam is a religion of peace, he's trying to deceive you. A Muslim in the West probably believes that. But those who really understand Islam will still tell you that Islam is a religion of peace, even if they know what Islam actually teaches. And so stage one, when Muslims are outnumbered, they are to proclaim a message of peace. We saw one of the passages from the early history of Islam. But that's not the final marching orders for Muslims. Stage two, when Muslims form not a majority of a population yet, but when they have significant numbers, significant enough to fight in self-defense, they are commanded to engage in defensive jihad. This is when the Muslim community is being persecuted, or when someone is mocking Muhammad or something like that. Any attack on Islam, Muslims are allowed to retaliate. They don't go out and subjugate people, but they are allowed, when Islam is threatened somehow, they are allowed to fight. In stage one, they're not allowed to fight at all. So let me give you a passage that started stage two. This is the first passage of the Quran where Muslims were allowed to fight. Surah 22, 39 to 40. Permission to fight is given to those upon whom war is made, because they are oppressed, and most surely Allah is well able to assist them. Those who have been expelled from their homes without a just cause, except that they say, our Lord is Allah. Permission to fight is given to those upon whom war is made, because they are oppressed. Muslims are being oppressed, so they are allowed to fight. Lots of Muslims in the West want to pretend that this is what Islam teaches. This is the final message of Islam. So yes, Muslims are allowed to fight unbelievers, but it's in self-defense, don't you see? It's when Muslims are being attacked. Actually, these aren't the final marching orders of Islam. Stage 3, these are the final marching orders of Islam, of Muhammad, when Muslims are able to do so. Stage 3. Stage 3, when Muslims form a majority of the population, they are permitted to engage, commanded to engage in offensive jihad. This is where you are fighting to convert people or fighting to subjugate, violently subjugate Jews and Christians. Most common passage we quote here, Surah 929 of the Quran, "Fight those who believe not in Allah, nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his messenger, nor acknowledge the religion of truth from among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued." So notice what this passage says. It doesn't say fight people who are attacking you. It doesn't say fight if they're oppressing you. It says fight those who believe not in Allah. Fight the unbelievers. Not fight the people who are attacking you. Fight the unbelievers. This is stage 3. Now look around the world, and then we're going to bring it back to Bishop Dobbs, because we're going to look at some of the places that are either in the ends of stage 2 or are flat out in stage 3. In Islam, you have these 3 stages. When Muslims are totally outnumbered, peace and tolerance. When Muslims have a significant portion of the population, 20, 30%, defensive jihad. You can engage in acts of terrorism. If someone makes cartoons about Muhammad, you can do something about that. Stage 3, Muslims are formed the majority. You violently subjugate the population. Look around the world. United States, what stage would we be in? What stage would we be in? What stage would the United States be in? What do you think?
I would say we're at the tail end of 1.
The tail end of 1. I would put us certainly somewhere in stage 1, where Muslims aren't able to win in a conflict, and so stage 1. Certainly some areas of the United States where populations are rising, but we're in stage 1. We go to especially certain areas of Europe and certain areas of cities where Muslims have 30, 40% of the population. Where would they be?
Stage 2.
Certainly stage 2, where they're permitted to engage in defensive jihad. And over there, when you see cartoons of Muhammad, or someone starts, some Jews are thinking they have equal rights, what do you see? You start seeing Muslims start to stand up for things that bother them. Those Jews over there, I associate them with Israel, so this is self-defense. Those people are criticizing Muhammad, self-defense. So you have stage 2, and then we have stage 3. This is where Muslims make up 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 99% of a population. And the thing is, as Islam spread, the areas where it spread were filled with other religions. Lots of areas were filled with Christians. Lots of areas had lots of Jews. Lots of areas, as it spread east, had other religions. And in stage 3, once Muslims take over that area, persecution. That's the topic of our show tonight. So think about this for a moment. Persecution. Where do you see Muslims in a majority with a significant population of non-Muslims, Christians or Jews or Hindus or something, where those Christians or Jews or Hindus can live safely, not worrying about their rights being taken away from them? Where? And why is that? It goes right back to the teachings of Muhammad, right back to the teachings of Islam, right back to the Quran. And I wonder sometimes how dumb we can be when we have the roadmap. We open up the Quran, we have the entire plan laid out. Here's what we do when we're outnumbered. Here's what we do when we can start to fight. Here's what we do when we control an area. And you look at the world, you see that pattern kept up perfectly, and no one seems to be able to get it. I mean, this is not rocket science here. What you just heard, how easy is that to understand? It's totally easy to understand. Anyone could understand this, and yet our leaders just don't. And until you understand this pattern, you will not understand why Islam acts so differently, depending on where it is in the world. You won't understand, look, I go down the street, Muslims are so peaceful and tolerant. Why are Christians suffering in Muslim lands? Well, that's what we want to focus on tonight. We needed to understand that background, and now I believe we can understand pretty much everything that's going on in the world. You can understand what's going on with CARE and ISNA in America. You can understand what's going on in Europe and certain places in Africa. And especially you can understand places where Islam either has the majority or is starting to attain the majority. And what do we find in the world? Well, now we want to take it back to Bishop Dobbs. Bishop Dobbs, can you hear us?
I can hear you, and I think I'm joining you by phone.
Oh yes, we were having some Skype difficulties, and we could have continued with the Skype, but we might have to work on that problem. So we've thought it better to get a clear voice over the phone.
That's just fine.
Okay, so where did you want to start?
The introduction by our brother in the studio is very, very helpful. One of the challenges that we're seeing of great significance, and it's sad to have to pick one place because there's a growing challenge of persecution across the Muslim world. But let's talk for a moment about what's happening in Nigeria. People may be aware that Nigeria is divided almost along religious lines, with a concentration of the Christians largely in the south, and the Muslim population, the majority population of Muslims in the north. That's a fairly crude division, but nevertheless it's the division that's used by many commentators with regards to Nigeria. The group Boko Haram, which is a group that's in the north of Nigeria, an Islamist group, has said recently that the Nigerian state and Christians are their enemies, and that they will continue launching attacks on the Nigerian state. Their goal to establish an Islamic state in place of the secular state of Nigeria. And just this past weekend, there was a significant attack, which is just one more in a series of ongoing horrific attacks in Nigeria. There were 3 bombs targeted at Christian churches in the north. 21 people were killed. Numerous others, perhaps as many as 100, have been injured. And this is a concerted effort of resurgent Islam in northern Nigeria to attack the Christian community. The group that Barnabas Fund is associated with, that I'm also associated with, of Anglican Christians here in North America, is associated with the Church of Nigeria, Anglican Communion. And I'm very much in touch with my colleagues in the Anglican Church in northern Nigeria, who are suffering significantly as a result of this challenge. One of our bishops, Bishop Timothy Yahara, the Bishop of Jalingo in Tabara State, recently reported that there was a bomb in one of his services. 27 people were killed. So far, he reported additional people have died over the last number of weeks. This is one of just of one nation where we're seeing a concerted attack by resurgent Islam to eradicate Christians from Nigeria's north.
Now, Bishop Dobbs, just so that, because there are lots of people who aren't familiar with what's going on, and actually, you know, on the show, we're typically very familiar with the Muslim sources. We know the Quran really well. We've studied the Hadith. We've studied the Sirah literature. We study the life of Muhammad. But here on this show, we usually we focus on the early history of Islam and not what's going on today, which is why we have someone like you come on the program. But for the sake of our viewers, is there a war going on between Muslims and non-Muslims, so that the Muslims in the north are just, hey, it's we're in a war, so that's why we can fight the Christians?
Well, Boko Haram is a group that's being funded externally in Nigeria by funds from outside of the country. They are clearly intent in eradicating Christianity from Nigeria. They've stated that as one of their goals. Their name means to eradicate Western education. And they are determined to eradicate Christians from the north. Earlier this year, they gave Christians an ultimatum to leave the north. If they didn't leave the north, they would suffer horrific penalties. One of our Anglican dioceses, 95% of the Christians in the Anglican diocese of Maiduguri in the north have had to flee for safety to the south. So I wouldn't say that there's a civil war in Nigeria, as perhaps we've seen in the Sudan, but I would say we are very close to seeing an escalation of violence in Nigeria, where Christians are going to have to determine how best they can defend themselves to continue to practice their faith freely, which should be their right as as Christians under the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights to be able to choose and change their religion without fear of reprisal. And the tension in Nigeria is huge.
Yeah, what really scares me about places like Nigeria is you do have plenty of Muslims in the north who have no intentions of going out and killing and subjugating Christians, but you have a group like Boko Haram who's constantly launching attacks, blowing up churches, killing Christians, and so on. And there could come a point when Christians just retaliate out of anger and out of just being fed up with the constant attacks on them. And as soon as Christians retaliate against some Muslims, then some of those Muslims in the north who didn't want to fight, now they start saying, wait a minute, Christians are attacking us. And so it's very easy to escalate these situations and end up with a kind of civil war. I wanted to ask you, because I've been told this. A lot of people consider Nigeria as kind of the dividing line between the Muslim East and the non-Muslim West. Not in the sense that it's an East-West boundary, but in the sense that as Islam has spread across Africa, took over North Africa, but as it moved downward, that the dividing line would be right about there in the midway mark in Nigeria, and of course in Sudan as Islam spreads downward, and which makes it kind of a much more important area than people may be aware of, because this is the dividing line. As Islam keeps spreading, it keeps taking over more areas, it spreads into new territories, and all the groups that are already there are going to suffer. But again, I only heard this from someone. Is that considered kind of the dividing line?
Well, I think what is important to understand is that Nigeria is Africa's most populous country. If we were to lose Nigeria in a civil war, with Islam in the ascendancy, with the Christian community becoming crushed because they're unable to defend themselves, then we've got a real challenge across the entire continent. We already have a challenge across Africa as Islam grows strong. If we were to lose Nigeria, we would have an increasingly significant and focused challenge with regards to the ability of the Christian community to freely worship and practice Christianity across Africa. And this is one of the reasons why we've been advocating on Capitol Hill with regards to the current administration's refusal to recognize and name Boko Haram as a terrorist organization, to fund various activities of Muslim initiatives in the north, which will only fuel a stronger Islamic presence and further place pressure on Christian communities in Nigeria.
All right, brother, we have to take a very short break, and we'll come back in just a moment. We certainly want to continue this discussion, and I'd like to ask when we come back if, what kind of, just Christians who are viewing this program who aren't involved, if there's anything we can do. Because, I mean, you're sitting here, you have, we have, people have jobs and so on, and Nigeria is just on the other side of the world. Is there anything people can do? And then we'll move on to some other issues. All right, we'll be back in just a moment here on Jesus or Muhammad. welcome back to Jesus or Muhammad. We've been discussing persecution in general, but we've been focusing for the past several minutes on the situation in Nigeria and the situation with Boko Haram. Now, CL, you're a Muslim, right? Back in the day, way back in the day, like what, year and a half, 2 years ago? Last year. Wow, way back in the day, You come a long way very, very quickly. All right, now, a lot of people in the West, if you brought this up to them, and we're going to address this issue, we'll get back to Bishop Dobbs. A lot of people in the West, when you say things like this, look at Boko Haram, look at the things they're doing, they say, that's not Islam, right? That's not Islam. That's not Islam. Those are extremists. They got their ideologies from somewhere else, right? They got the true Islam lines up perfectly with Western values that we find in the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution, right? That's the truth. But you have a place like Nigeria, and they're specifically saying, wait, we have to get rid of secular government. Why would they do that?
Well, first of all, I think the bishop, he said something about the meaning of the name Boko Haram. Mm-hmm. He said education is haram. That's a good translation. I read a translation that said that ideology, Western ideology, is haram, is a better translation of Boko Haram. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sitting here and I'm looking at a post from ChristianPost.com, and they asked the Boko Haram, why are you doing this? Are you responsible for this? And the spokesman for Boko Haram said this, quote, the Nigerian state and the Christians are our enemies, and we will be launching attacks on the Nigerian state and its security apparatus as well as the churches until we achieve our goal of establishing an Islamic state in the place of the secular state. Boko Haram stated in no uncertain terms in the statement published by Unsung Defender on Thursday. It's a newspaper in Nigeria. They also went on to say, we are responsible for the suicide attack on the church in Jos and also another attack on the church in Blue. So they're just coming out saying, we did their suicide attacks. Our whole goal is to overthrow the secular government of Nigeria and to get rid of the Christians.
But why?
But there's a tie-in between that name. There's a tie-in between their name, what they're doing, and the Quran. Remember, I just said their name. Western ideology is haram. They want to get rid of the secular state, and they want to get rid of Christianity. They obviously have been reading their Quran, and they read their Quran very well, and they take it very serious. For instance, if we look into the Quran in Surah An-Nisa, which is chapter number 4, verse 76, it says in the English translation of the meaning, those who believe fight in the cause of Allah, and those who disbelieve fight in the cause of the Tawhut. So fight you against the friends of Shaitan. Ever feeble indeed is the plot of Shaitan.
Hang on. There's a word there. People don't know what that word means.
I know, it's a funny word. It's foreign, strange. Tawhut, Arabic term. Now, I'm looking at the Noble Quran. I like the Noble Quran. I like the Noble Quran because they leave some words untranslated, then they give you the tasfir of the word instead of hiding it behind certain English terminologies. The translators of the Noble Quran translate it correctly, and you can go look at all the commentaries if you want to. Tawhut means shaitan. It means the idols, but it also means the disbelievers, the Christians, the Jews, their leadership, false ideologies. So a group like Boko Haram, Western ideology is haram. They're going out, they want to overthrow the government, and they want to kill all the Christians because they've been reading the Quran, not because they've been eating mushrooms. No, they've been reading the Quran. No, they read Surah An-Nisa.
But in fairness to Islam, they don't have to kill all the Christians unless those Christians and Jews think they're equals, right?
No, they don't have to kill all the Christians.
They have
and
to
Jews.
understand their place, though, right?
They have to gain the upper hand. Mm-hmm. Allah and his messenger must become uppermost in the land. They must take control of the land. They must have the government so they can implement Sharia so the Christians, the Jews, and the secularists will be under their control.
And then once they have that, and then once they have the power, then maybe the Christians and Jews can live as second-class citizens.
Well, they can convert, or they can pay the jizya. Mm-hmm. But for the people who are secular, there's nothing in the Quran for somebody that's secular to pay the jizya. Mm-hmm. You get killed, or you either convert or you die.
You're right. All right, brother. Bishop Dobbs, you still with us? Hello, Bishop Dobbs? Yes.
There he goes.
I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. We wanted to get back to Nigeria. We talked briefly about Boko Haram and how their views are tied to the Haram. Tied to the Quran. Anything else you wanted to share about Nigeria?
I think what's very important to know in the midst of the immense challenges in Nigeria, that the church continues to grow from strength to strength. Mm-hmm. And this obviously is a great threat to the resurgent Islamic community, because they're seeing the churches being planted, they're seeing the Christian gospel being proclaimed, they're seeing the influence of the Christian community in various spheres of government and leadership and administration. And yet the only way that they know to counteract that is to increase their attacks on the Christian community. And I would want to encourage those who are watching the program tonight and listening to this conversation to become very much aware of what is happening in Nigeria. This has become one of the hotbeds of resurgent Islam. The pressure against the Christian community in Nigeria is enormous. The reports that I've seen, I was in Nigeria just a couple of months ago, particularly up in the north, in Jos and Kafanchan and Zonkwa, areas that have been targets of attacks against Christians. The suffering is enormous. We've got people who have lost homes and Christian businesses that have been destroyed, churches that have been burnt to the ground, bombs that have exploded in Christian compounds. The carnage and damage is horrific. Most tragically, we've got families that have been torn apart by the loss of their loved ones, people injured and maimed, simply because they are confessing Christians as Christians in the United States are. And this is the punishment they have for being faithful to the gospel.
Bishop Dow, we listen to the situation. You think back, we think in, is there even any hope? Apart from divine intervention, what is there that people can do? We tend to think that one of the most important things that we can do is to educate people about how these things are related to the teachings of Islam, so they stop denying it, so they at least start to acknowledge the connections. But is there anything beyond that we can do? Or do we just have to? Do we have to sit back and watch and as Christians are killed?
There are some very important things that we can do. Christians can pray, and they can seek the intervention of the living God on behalf of their brothers and sisters in Nigeria. That's absolutely critical. And Barnabas Fund, Barnabas Aid has a program of prayer notes that people can download from our website and various other places, as do other organizations. I encourage Christians to engage in prayer. Secondly, I don't think we can underestimate just how powerful an impact our education has on the community in which we live in the United States. You're right to suggest that, by and large, the situation in Nigeria and the challenge for suffering Christians around the world goes unannounced by much of the media and is unacknowledged in much of the church. And so, therefore, whatever we can do to educate the communities in which we are living to the very real, growing, and present challenge that is faced by Christians in Nigeria and elsewhere as a result of Islam, is critically important. To give people the stories, the information, the news, the very thing that we're doing on this program, the education about the challenges of Islam, is absolutely critical. I think, too, thirdly, I believe that there is a time and a place for us to petition our elected leaders with regards to how we can respond on behalf of suffering Christians in places like Washington, D.C., and our state legislatures and various other places. Right now, Barnabas Fund has got a petition called Proclaim Freedom, where we're encouraging people to sign a petition to help us promote the situation of suffering Christians on Capitol Hill, calling for people to be able to freely choose and change their religion without fear of reprisal. And our brother in the studio might be able to make comment. One of the greatest challenges that many converts from Islam to Christianity have is what's commonly known as the apostasy law in Islam. Islam is the only religion in the world that calls for the execution of the male men that leave the faith and refuse to return. And this is one of the great challenges for those who hear the gospel message, want to leave Islam, and become followers of Jesus Christ. So there's a place for us to petition our own government with regards to supporting the administrations that support Sharia law and therefore the apostasy law of Islam.
All right, and we're going to look at apostasy laws, and you can share anything that you'd like to share with viewers about things that are going on in the world. We do have some callers, and we don't want to kind of build up like a dozen callers. We want to try and take a couple here and there. So we're going to take a couple calls real quick, and then we'll move on to the issue of apostasy. But who do we have on the line first? Tony.
Yes, how you doing, sir?
How you doing, Tony?
Okay. I have a comment a little bit. If you said that violence is no good, and you said that really the violence from Islam is not good toward the Christians and the Christians toward the Islam, both of them. But I want to ask you a question. Isn't it God knows everything before things happen, and He planned on it? So I was asking, how come you guys interrupting the God's will? If God wants these people to kill each other, because He planned on it, and He already planned to kill His own Son on the cross, to die. So if the God will allow all of these things, so how come you guys interrupting the God's will, and you are trying to say that the Muslim is bad and whoever kill each other is bad? So Jesus never goes to the temple of the people who pray for the statues and told them that you are evil. He never went to any place and told the people, you guys are evil. So why Jesus did not go to these temples like Buddhist or Confucius or other religions?
Why didn't Jesus go to the Buddhist temple? Jesus
he did not go over there.
Okay, thank you, Tony.
Okay.
Tony, you call in almost every show, and every show is every call is really
answer my
really
question first.
Beyond ridiculous. So let's go ahead and let's give a brief response to Tony. According to Tony here, why are we against violence when obviously God is for violence because He allows it to happen? Does that make sense to you?
Well, I'm wondering, is Tony an atheist?
Yeah, Tony sounds like some kind of former Muslim who's now an atheist, but has retained his anger and hatred of Christianity. He calls almost every program, and no matter what the topic is, I mean, think about this. We're talking about people dying, people being blown up, people having their body parts blown off, people having their children killed right in front of them. And Tony's contribution to the conversation, we say, Tony, what do you have to say? Why are you guys trying to stop it? Your God lets it happen, so obviously He's for it. I mean, seriously,
well, I would like to know where Tony lives, so I can come in Tony's house, and maybe I can take some of your food and take some of your money and take some of your
and
stuff.
God's letting you do it, right?
And
God's letting you do it.
You should just sit on the couch and let me do it, because it was bound to happen.
Yeah, I mean, seriously,
get upset about it.
Seriously, Tony, you act like we say that everything that happens, God wants it to happen. That's not what Christians believe. God commands us to care for people. He commands us to love everyone. He commands us to be what? Peacemakers. We are commanded to be peacemakers. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers. So we are commanded to make peace. If He's commanding us to make peace, if He commands us to love everyone, if He commands us to go out, how can you believe that our God wants us to let everything happen just as it happens and sit back and do nothing? You know that's absurd. You got to come back with some better arguments, Tony. Until you do, stop calling.
And that second half of what he said was puzzling as well, where he was talking about, well, Jesus never went to a Buddhist temple. And, well, I mean,
Jesus never moved to India and went to a Buddhist temple. What's wrong? See, so he's...
Well, I'm looking at Matthew 3:7, where it says, but when He saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming for baptism, He said to them, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come?" Now, if Jesus is telling these people of a false ideology in a religion, he's rebuking them. So how can you say we as followers of Jesus shouldn't rebuke people of a false ideology and a false religion? So both of your points were ridiculous.
All right, so thank you, Tony, once again. All right, let's take one or two more callers, and then we'll get back to the issue of apostasy. Who do we have on the line next? Eric, do you hear us? Is Eric with us? Hello. Hi, you're on ABN.
Okay.
You hear us?
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, clearly, David.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine, can't complain, really. A few points, like just 2 points. The first point being, can you compare and contrast, say, the violence done by Muhammad and Inquisition, during the Catholic era? Is the Inquisition anywhere comparable with what Muhammad did?
No.
Well, no. They're different in two very important respects. One, the Inquisition killed approximately, I think what, 2,000? I've heard estimates between a couple of hundred and around 2,000 over centuries. So I'm not saying that diminishes what happened. If someone's being killed unjustly, then certainly we condemn that. But that's a relatively isolated period in Christian history. Whereas what happened? Why did that eventually stop? Why aren't Christians carrying out the Inquisition today? Obviously, we have the power, right? We have 2 billion people who believe in Jesus Christ around the world. Why aren't we carrying out the Inquisitions? And the reason is Christians down through the ages can be influenced by political factors. They can be influenced by all kinds of things, just as Muslims can be influenced by all kinds of things. Christians can be influenced by all kinds of things. And what you had eventually, for the first 3 centuries, Christians are persecuted. Eventually, Christianity merges with the Roman Empire, and in that process, adopted some of the ways of dealing with issues of the Roman Empire. And I personally don't think Christianity should have ever merged with a government that's bent on having an empire and so on. But down through the ages, there could be various things, but something like the Inquisition, the main difference is you can't trace the Inquisition back to the teachings of Jesus. You go back to the teachings of Jesus. Jesus commands you very clearly, to love everyone, to harm no one, to put down your sword, things like that. That's what Jesus commands of the church, of the people in the church. Governments are a different story. Governments are allowed to enforce laws and so on. But as far as the Christians, believers as Christians, as part of the church, we don't go out and subjugate. In fact, if you read the New Testament, the worst, most extreme thing the church could ever do to someone is say, you have to go. You're not part of the fellowship anymore. That is the most extreme thing the church could do, according to the Bible. Sorry, you can't have fellowship with us anymore. So how can you possibly get Inquisition out of that? Obviously, you can't. And then we turn to Islam. And we look and we see Muslims fighting unbelievers. What do we do? What happens when we open up the Quran? Fight those who do not believe in Allah. We find Muslims, we're horrified when we find Muslims beheading apostates. We open up the Hadith. What does Muhammad say? If anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him. If anyone leaves Islam, chop off his head. Those are quotations. Those are quotations from the Hadith. So it's a massive difference between a religion that teaches something and then someone carries it out, and a religion like Christianity, which teaches people to do something and sometimes Christians ignore it. So just to clarify, Christians and Muslims can both do what their religion commands, and sometimes Christians and Muslims don't do what their religion commands. But when we're talking about Christians committing violence, they are commanded to do the opposite. And so when a Christian kills in the name of Jesus, he is disobeying and dishonoring his Lord. When a Muslim kills in the name of Allah, he's doing exactly what Allah commands him to do. So there couldn't be a bigger difference between the two situations. You said you had 2 questions. What's the next one?
All right, David. Basically, I try my best to translate this bit. basically they're saying like the Inquisition is based on Luke 14, chapter 25, where Jesus is saying like you have to hate the family and so on. I know it's rubbish, but try to help me out on that one, please.
You said Luke 14:25. I think you're a couple verses off there.
About like hating someone and things like that. Like if you love me, you have to hate someone. Something like that.
Cost of being a disciple.
I'm not sure. What?
Hate your father, hate your mother.
Wait, could you tell us what you're referring to? Because Paul and I think you're talking about two different things. Could you maybe go ahead?
It says Luke 14, chapter 25. Maybe this Muslim got it wrong, but they say like something about like if you want to be a disciple of Jesus, then you have to hate your family, like love Jesus more. If you don't hate your family.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Paul was right. I thought you were talking about another passage that Muslims quote from the book of Luke. All right. Well, this is a fundamental rule, and we have to go to a quick break after that, and then we'll come back to Bishop Dobbs after the break. But one of the fundamental rules of Scripture interpretation, one which Muslims always seem to understand when we're talking about the Quran. If you go to your Muslim friend, it's very easy to do, and say, hey, let's read Surah 9, verse 5. It says, slay the idolaters wherever you find them. So are you supposed to slay the idolaters wherever you find them? What's the Muslim going to say? Context. You have to look at the context. You have to look at the verses that come before. You have to look at the verses that come after. You have to look at other things the book says, and you have to base your interpretations on a larger picture, not ripping one little verse out of context. Now, when Jesus says that in order to be his follower, you have to hate your mother and your father, or something like that, does that mean exactly what that says? This is Jesus who commands you to love everyone, even your enemies, even people who are persecuting you. Is he saying that you have to actually hate your parents? No, what's he saying? Well, if you look at what he means in the context of the Gospels, you see him doing the same thing over and over. And the idea is your love for God is supposed to be so great you don't let anything hold you back. And even as apostles said, they had to leave their homes to come follow Jesus. So he cannot be telling people to hate because he doesn't allow you to hate. That's very clear based on what Jesus says. So in this passage, when he says something like that, you read it in the context of the Gospels as a whole. He's saying your people tend to cling to whatever their parents say and to ignore the things of God. Look, if you really want to follow Jesus, your love for other people is supposed to be significantly less than your concern for God. You're not supposed to stay at home when Jesus calls you out. So that's obviously what Jesus means in these passages. And so anyone who says otherwise, certainly ripping things out of context. But if I were you and your Muslim friends wanted to bring this up, just find a couple of the passage. I would go to Matthew chapter 5, for instance. All the passages where Jesus commands nothing but love, and when he says something like this in the context of people saying, "No, I don't want to go out. I don't want to follow Jesus. I want to stay back." Jesus said, "Look, you can't, at the end of the day, when God commands you to do something, you can't be too worried about other things that are going on." So I hope that helps. We have to go to a quick break. And by the way, if that is a concern, let us know, because we can certainly do much more exegesis on that. I try to give a very quick answer because we do have a program, and the focus is on persecution. In fact, if you'd like us to do an entire program where we go to this verse, every verse that's similar to it, every verse that Muslims appeal to in the New Testament to pretend that Christianity is violent, we'd love to do that. But just think about the difference. Jesus clearly commands, clearly, it can't be any more clear, commands his followers to love everyone, to harm no one, to persecute no one. And Muslims look around for a verse, rip it out of context. You see here Christianity is violent. Why would they do that? Because if you open up the Quran, you find, if you read the passages in context, the Quran does command violence, and they have to go to the Quran and try to cherry pick a couple of peaceful verses. So what you find in the West is Islam. If you read these passages in context, if you read the teachings of Muhammad in context, Islam looks very bad, right? And Christianity, the teachings of Jesus, look very good by comparison. And so the goal of many Muslims in the West is to make Islam sound better than it really is, more peaceful than it really is, and to make Christianity sound more violent than it really is, so they kind of help with that little comparison problem. Hope that helps. Again, if you want an entire program where we can delve into these passages much more deeply, just let us know. We have to go to a quick break. We'll be back with Bishop Dobbs, and we're going to focus on apostasy and then get to some more callers after we address the apostasy issue. We'll be back in just a moment here on Jesus or Muhammad. Welcome back to Jesus or Muhammad. We took some callers, but we've been focusing on the issue of persecution. We talked about one country, Nigeria, and we want to address the issue of apostasy. Bishop Dobbs, can you hear me?
Hear you loud and clear.
Now, we certainly find commands to kill apostates in the Muslim sources, but is that something for, just 1,400 years ago, and, maybe Muslims did it for a little while, but, no one wants to do that anymore? Or is that also a concern for today?
Increasingly, we're becoming aware today, while it might be officially rare for Muslim countries that are governed by certain aspects of Sharia law to legislate that apostates are killed. Elements of Islamic communities are taking Sharia into their own hands, and we are seeing considerable pressure placed upon converts from Islam. There is very clear documented evidence today that men and women, particularly men, but women also have lost their lives as a result of their conversion to Jesus Christ. There have been some high-profile cases recently in Iran with regards to Christians who are at this moment potentially in danger of losing their lives because of their faith in Jesus Christ. And more we're seeing, even in our own country, the challenge that it is for Christians who were once Muslims, now converted to Christianity, to be able to freely practice their faith without fear of reprisal. And this is of great concern to us in the Barnabas Fund. It's of concern to Christian communities around the world. Believers are having to meet in secret in many places around the world because of the pressure that is increasing against them as a result of the converts that are part of those Christian communities.
Now, Bishop Dobbs, I just wanted to add, because this is what I think. I want to see if you agreed. But we see in the Arab Spring, and even aside from the Arab Spring, that the tendency in many Muslim countries is towards an increased conservative view of Islam. And here, by conservative, I mean going back to the teachings of Muhammad and not going off on liberal interpretations. But I mean, just a few decades ago, many Muslim countries were pretty safe compared to what they are today. So it looks like you have movements, the Salafis and the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're growing rapidly, and the tendency is we need to get back to the teachings of Muhammad. We need to get back to the basics. We need to get back to the example of Muhammad and his companions. As this continues, and we have every indication that it's going to continue. We don't have any indication that this is just going to, these movements are just going to fall apart and they're going to peter out. As this continues, do you think we can expect to see a bigger problem with killing apostates right around the corner?
Certainly, I believe, as the situation is indicated to us at this current juncture in history, if this is any indication of what awaits the Christian community in the near future, we will only see an increase of persecution against the Christian community from resurgent Islam. This is very clearly evident in some of the challenges. We talked about Nigeria. We could talk about Christians in Eritrea. We could talk about Christians in Syria. We could talk about the Farsi churches being closed in Iran. All of these places are under increasing pressure simply because Islam is growing in its ascendancy in these nations. And so for the Christian community, we in the West, we must educate ourselves, become very aware of what Islam says about apostasy, what the Sharia says, what the Hadith reports with regards to those who leave the faith, especially the challenges for Muslim men, and educate ourselves so that we understand what it means to reach Muslims for Christ and what a challenge this may mean for those who come to faith, even in North America.
And you bring up Muhammad's teachings, and this is very important because just a couple of years ago we had the situation with Rifka Berry, where she said that her father had threatened to kill her over her conversion, her apostasy, and Muslim leaders and Muslim organizations and the media universally almost said that's ridiculous, that's not what Islam teaches. Paul, we brought you on here to talk about Egypt. I'm not sure we're going to get there because we only have about 20 minutes left. So, and actually, it might be better to hold off on Egypt until these elections or the situation with the elections are concluded, and then we can have a full discussion of Egypt. But
sources:
Islam,
yes,
apostasy. Did Muhammad command his followers to kill apostates? Is that true?
That is the question. So let's take a look at some quotes from Sahih al-Bukhari, which is the most trusted collection of strong hadith.
So this is not weird hadith,
Right.
weird sources that you're bringing out.
These are Sahih. Right?
Okay.
So these are
What's this mean? What's that mean? Just for viewers who...
correct, strong, as opposed to da'if, meaning weak. So these are from Bukhari. You can look these up. First one comes from number 6878. Narrated Abdullah, Allah's Messenger said, "The blood of a Muslim who confesses that La ilaha illallah and that I am the Messenger of Allah cannot be shed except in three cases." What are the three cases for shedding the blood of a Muslim? Life for life, a married person who commits illegal sexual intercourse, and the one who turns renegade from Islam, apostasy, and leaves a group of Muslims.
Leaves a group of Muslims.
That's apostasy, right?
Okay, what else do you have? That's just one. You could be distorting that. What's going on?
Right, that could be totally just an anomaly. 6921, also in Sahih al-Bukhari, also says, Ibn Umar, Az-Zuhri, and Ibrahim said, "A female apostate who reverts from Islam should be killed." Now this one's talking specifically about females.
That's a commentary, and actually that's an important issue because that is one area where there is disagreement. Bishop Dobbs pointed out that as far as the male apostates, there's agreement that they have to be killed. But there is disagreement about the status of women, and just for the sake of viewers, 3 of the 4 traditional schools of Sunni Islamic jurisprudence say that a female apostate should be killed just as a male apostate. One school says that the female isn't to be killed, and this is the Shia position as well, that the female isn't to be killed, she's to be tortured until she comes back to Islam. So she's to be put in house arrest or prison and tortured. And the idea is you torture her during the 5 daily prayers, right? Now think about how I mean, it's brilliant, but this is some sick stuff here. You torture the woman during her daily prayers as a reminder, since you don't want to pray as a good Muslim, instead of praying at this time, we are going to lash you during this time. How long are you going to go without praying?
That's terrifying.
That's some horrifying stuff, and not all Muslim countries do that. Muslim countries have been don't always follow the teachings of Islam, but those of you out there who think Islam is good, that's actually what it teaches. You kill the man, you torture the woman. Again, that's one school. The other schools agree you kill a woman just as you kill a man. But wait a minute. You quoted 3 Muslim authorities. No, you quoted 3 Muslim authorities there. That wasn't Muhammad saying that.
Right.
That was companions saying that. So what else? You got anything else?
One more also from Bukhari, 6922. Allah's Messenger, Muhammad, said, "Whoever changed his Islamic religion, then kill him."
Oh, well, now that one's clear, isn't it?
That's black and white.
That one's hard. That one's hard to dispute. If anyone changes his Islamic religion, kill him. If anyone changes his Islamic religion, kill him. Now, my Muslim friends who want to reinterpret what the Quran says, I'll just ask you, what does he mean when he says, if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him? If you tell me he meant something else, then you're telling me something about your prophet. You're telling me he couldn't say what he meant. You're telling me that his teachings are unclear. You're saying that he said one thing when he actually meant something else, that he wanted to say, if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, let him go. But, when it came time to say it, it just came out, kill them. If you take your Muslim sources seriously, you need to think about what this man said, because when you look at the increasing trend, as we pointed out, towards more orthodox, back to basics Islam, what happens when more Muslims in a community start reading this and going, hey, that guy over there left Islam. Muhammad said here, if anyone leaves his Islamic religion, kill him. Maybe I'm not obeying Allah until I actually obey that teaching. And I just can't go on in disobedience to Allah. Rough stuff in your sources. I suggest reading them, and I would love it. I would love it. If every Muslim out there would sit down with Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim and read the commands of your prophet. I'm sure some of the Muslims, if they read them, would become more radical, but I think far more people at the end of the day would be appalled and shocked and would leave Islam. Bishop Dobbs, can you still hear us?
Hear you.
Hey, we have only about 13, 14 minutes left. We want to know any other important issue that you'd like to cover.
I would want to encourage people to engage in this whole dialogue and narrative in the three ways I mentioned earlier. Become educated, pray, and engage yourself in whatever actions can be taken in the community with your administration, with local leadership, because this is a serious question for Christians. Let me comment on the apostasy issue. As we've made mention on the program already, the popular cry in the media and elsewhere is that Islam is a religion of peace. I've spent the last 7 or 8 years of my life working alongside Christians who have suffered some of the most indescribable sufferings as a result of their faith. I'm thinking of a Christian mother in Indonesia whose Christian daughter and her friends were coming home from school. They were attacked by a group of Muslim extremists. 3 of them were beheaded. One was attacked brutally. I met with the family of one of those girls who was beheaded. The mother said when they retrieved her body, it was a body without a head. The head was found a few days later outside a church in Indonesia with a letter in it calling for 1,000 more Christian heads. I challenge anyone watching the program tonight and listening to this discussion to go and tell that Christian mother that Islam is a religion of peace. Her daughter paid the ultimate price because of her faith in Jesus Christ and because the Muslims in that community were doing all they could to eradicate Christianity. And so these are very, very serious issues for us to face.
One thing that disturbed me when you were talking about that is, if this were happening to Muslims, we would see a reaction in the West. We would not see silence in the West. We would not see silence from our government. You talked about petitioning our government, but over and over again in the recent Arab Spring, we see some largely secular governments, well, at least far more secular than the Muslim Brotherhood or Salafis, and they're fighting some of their own people, and we look and say, hey, you can't do that. Hey, you just can't do that. We have to stop them from doing what they're doing to those Muslims. And it gains worldwide attention. It's all over CNN. It's all over MSNBC. It's all over the news every day, over and over again, until there's action, until someone steps up and says, we're going to stop that regime. Now, lots of the times, and wanted to get to this tonight, we're not going to, but one of the things that happen is we don't think what's about to replace that mostly secular regime that we're backing. And here we have the situation in Syria, and I look and I'm appalled. I'm appalled at some of the things the regime there has done. But at the same time, I look and say, all right, you go in there and you mess around with it. What's going to replace that? And so, these Salafis and Muslim brotherhoods are gaining more influence, and the secular regimes are taking over. And the entire way, we seem to be helping them. And because of the media exposure, you have lots of Americans saying, look, we need to go help those people. And yet we find places like Nigeria and other areas where Christians are being horribly, horribly persecuted, and no one seems to care. I mean, obviously there are people who care, but no one. Just by comparison, if it had been the Christian north, if the Christians had been in the north of Nigeria, and were just going around blowing up mosques in a Muslim southern area, this would be on the news every day, over and over again, not just the occasional mention that we hear. But since the situation is reversed, and it's Muslims in the north killing and blowing up Christians in the south, you do hear about it. They give the token mention of it here and there, but nothing, absolutely nothing compared to what would happen, nothing compared to the outcry that would happen if it were Christians doing it to Muslims. Would that be right?
Yes, I believe that that's a very accurate comment. And if we had seen the tragedies that we've seen in places in the Muslim world happening in the United States, we may have seen more of a engagement in the mainstream media. We need to consider that since the tragic events of September the 11th, 2001, there has been a huge interest in Islam. And we could say that we've never had as much information available to us about Islam as we have now. And yet, we're so uneducated when it comes to understanding the great challenges that are confronting us, both in the Christian North, in the Muslim world, across the Christian community where they are in the minority, the results of the so-called Arab Spring and the revolutions across North Africa. While all of these have, in one sense, brought Islam to the center stage and caused something of a rethink of our opinion against Islam, we're yet to understand the great challenges that these situations are facing on the Christian communities. And my great appeal to Christians watching the program tonight and listening to us on this program is don't sit back, don't do nothing, don't turn the other way, don't think this isn't North America. This is what Christians call the body of Christ, the family of believers. What happens to a Christian family in a remote part of Indonesia when their daughter is murdered simply because she's a follower of Jesus, or what's happening in the past 48 hours in Kaduna and in Nigeria's north, where churches are being bombed and destroyed and Christians maimed and losing their lives, or whether it be in Iran where Christians are incarcerated and interrogated because of their confessed faith in Jesus Christ. That's happening to Christians in North America through our engagement, our connection with one another in the body of Christ. We can't simply turn the other way. We've got to engage and be the voice for our brothers and sisters in Christ that they are unable to be for themselves because of the persecution that they are suffering at the hands of Islam.
Well, thank you, brother. I just wanted to share a quick email that we just got because it certainly fits in with this topic. Just got an email here from a Christian woman married to a Muslim man. I assume she's married. She says that the father of her daughter. This is what she said. I was getting ready to watch the show. That's this show. I was getting ready to watch the show, and my daughter's Muslim father took the laptop out of my hand and hit me for trying to watch your guys' show. I feel persecuted in my own house. Thank you guys for what you do to try to show others the true face of Islam. I mean, think about this. Everywhere we look, the solution in Islam for every problem is always violence. CL, what do you do if someone steals in Islam?
Chop their hand off.
Chop the hand off.
Right,
You got to
man.
chop the hand off. Paul, what happens when someone leaves Islam?
Kill them.
You kill them. You chop off their heads. So you're chopping off hands. You're chopping off heads. Guys, what happens? What happens if a woman gets out of line? She's not listening to you. What do? Do you just...
Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, 34.
What's
3
that
steps.
say? You hug them, right?
Yeah, you buy them flowers.
You buy them lots of flowers. You win them over through compassion. You
no,
do what you saw in the movie Fireproof, and you become a better man, the sort of man that she will respect, right?
No, you admonish them. Next, you refuse to share their bed. And lastly, if they don't get in line, you beat them.
You beat them. You beat them into submission. So wife gets out of line, beat them. People are Christians and Jews, and they're trying to preach the gospel. You fight them until they are subjugated. Someone leaves Islam, you kill them. Someone steals, you chop off hands. And you can go on down the line. We can go almost any problem that rises in Islam, violence, 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 violence. This is what's in the Muslim sources. This is what we see around the world. And people say, it's a religion of peace. Well, what do you mean by religion of peace? If by peace you mean violence and bloodshed, then I agree completely. But that's not normally what we mean by religion of peace. So we thank Bishop Dobbs for being on the program. I'd like to thank CL and Paul. I wanted to get to some issues. Sorry, guys, we didn't. But we're going to have another show in just a half an hour. We apologize to the callers. I know there were a ton of callers because they kept telling me to take callers, but we want. I mean, come on, guys, we had to discuss this issue of persecution. and get some of this discussion underway. But we have another program at 10 o'clock. Sam Shamoun will be on with us. We will be discussing how Jesus can have a God, right? Christians believe Jesus is God, and yet Christians teach that Jesus prayed. Isn't this illogical? Isn't this irrational? Isn't this silly? Well, why don't you take a closer look at what we believe, and you Christians who are watching, you need to watch this too, because people are going to raise this objection against you. Muslims are going to raise this objection against you, and we're going to talk about how to deal with this issue. And callers, promise to get you on the next show, because I don't care about cutting Sam off. I don't care about it. That's my buddy. That's my buddy. But we'll have a bit longer program. We'll get to some of the callers. Again, thanks everyone, and everyone out there. I hope that you'll take the advice of Bishop Dobbs in those three things that we can do. Right now, we focus for the most part on this program on educating, but we need to be on our knees in prayer. If you look at what's happening to Christians around the world, there aren't many more important things you can do than praying, and you shouldn't get too distracted by other things. And also don't forget, according to the Bible, governments are instituted for a purpose. You see the Apostle Paul himself in the book of Acts, when he was being mistreated, he said, what? I appeal to Caesar. Take me to Caesar. I'm going to let him take action on this issue. That situation didn't work out too well in the end, but Paul believed you do petition the government to address grievances, and our goal as Christians would be to make governments, to ensure governments by our petitions do justice. They have their positions for a reason, and they need to be just with their positions, and we can call on them to do that. We have that right in America. We don't want to forfeit those rights. So make sure you pay attention to the things that have been said tonight, because a lot of people out there around the world are depending on you. And I would invite everyone to check out the Barnabas Fund on their website and maybe get involved with them, because they're doing great work. We'll see you in about half an hour right back here on Jesus or Muhammad, and we'll be discussing how Jesus can have a God when he is God. See you then.